I sort of set myself those sort of standards, never keep people waiting, get out of the office exactly on time every day, give your staff a decent lunch break. The other thing that I do is I outsource as much as I possibly can in my practice, whether it comes to fee collections, imaging, laboratory work.
Hello there, Orthopreneurs, and welcome to another episode of the Orthopreneurs podcast. Today, I am truly privileged to have somebody I respect a ton, somebody who's been a friend of mine for quite some time. And it's been a long time coming, David. But please, everybody, welcome David Bachmayer to the show. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I can hear your New York accent coming through beautiful. Beautiful. For those of you who may not know, that's an Australian accent. And the funny thing is, you're one of the few people in my ecosystem these days, David, who really knew me well before I became an orthodontist, and you knew me as a GP. That's the best part of this interview, is that our relationship, our friendship goes back to when I was just a lowly general dentist. I wasn't even an orthodontist yet. And the respect and kindness with which you showed a guy like me who would never refer you a patient, who couldn't speak ortho on any language, but you're just such a great, nice human being. It's always stuck with me. So thank you for that.
Thanks for that introduction, Glenn. And yeah, it was quite a privilege. Firstly, let me correct you. I don't have an Australian accent. It's a South African accent.
I know. It's just,
but I'm
but he
happy
practices in Sydney, so you got to pass it off a little bit.
That's true. That's true. And yes, I harken back to those days when we met at the Seattle Study Club, which was so close to both of our hearts at the time, both having quite an intense interest in interdisciplinary dentistry at the time. So it was a great privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, and we were both, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up a name. I don't like dropping names, but I think there's one name that you and I share in common who actually introduced us, who has been a huge guiding light in my life, and I think in yours as well, Dr. Ward Smalley, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Ward taught us all a lot. And, I often think of Ward and, you know that saying, perfection can be the enemy of good. And, Ward was the ultimate perfectionist. And we just learned a lot from Ward in that saying, how perfection can really be such a great thing, but can also, be difficult for us. So, I have a sensitivity around that.
I agree 100%. And for those of you who may not know Dr. Ward Smalley, he's still around. We talk about him in the past tense because while he's a friend and he's around, the impact he had while he was practicing orthodontics, in many ways, I would say is almost unparalleled. And I would go so far from people who were there in Seattle before I got there. I got there in 96. People who were there well before me said, but for Ward Smalley, there wouldn't have been a Vince Kokich the way Vince became Vince, because Ward, for those of you who don't know Ward Smalley, would you agree, David, he's arguably the greatest orthodontist technician, right, doing ortho, that most people don't know who he is.
That's absolutely true. And bear in mind, he did all that work long before digital dentistry came along, which has arguably made our job and the job of the digital smile designs and the implants and the difficult interdisciplinary dentistry a lot easier.
Yeah, 100%. And, for those, again, who don't know who he is, he's still around and he's a great guy. He triple boarded perio, pros, ortho. He was a lab technician, I believe, in the Navy, a dental technician. And then he went to University of Washington, got his dental degree, and then he went through the famed, and I use that word very, very carefully because it's true, the famed UW Perio-Pros program around the same time as John Coyce and Frank Spear, and then found he couldn't find an orthodontist who could set cases up to his level. So what do? You go back to UW's ortho program. And when I moved to Seattle in 1996, I was introduced to him through the Seattle Study Club. A little fun fact, I was not a serious guy. I cared, but I I like the person I am today is a radically different human being than I was before I met Ward. And he said to me, I will teach you everything you want to learn about occlusion, about setting up cases, about pros, about the understanding of perio, how ortho plays a role, how to set up a surgical case. He says, but I need you to be a serious student. And in one foul swoop, because it was the right place in my life, he changed me in a way that was, in a good way, irreparable. And from that point forward, I couldn't imagine never wanting to be my best at something. And he has that way. I feel like you've got the same feeling, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I feel we were both in the right place at the right time. And we both gained a lot from that relationship. And
Yeah.
I thank you both.
Yeah. And I think the first time we really spent time was on a golf course with Ward Smalley. I think it was
Absolutely.
Kapalua, maybe. I think it was Hawaii, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it could have been, or it may have been. Yeah, I think it was in Hawaii. It was at a Seattle Study Club
Yeah,
conference.
at the
Yep.
at the Ritz Carlton Kapalua, I think it was, and so nobody's going to shed a tear. Nobody's going to cry over us. But let's talk a little bit about where you are. So you're from South Africa originally, but now you're in Sydney, Australia. How long have you been practicing ortho?
Well, I graduated University of Toronto in 1984. Spent another year at the Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto, doing a fellowship in craniofacial surgery, which was a real privilege. And then I had to decide where I was going to live in the world because although I really loved South Africa and really wanted to be there, um, the political situation at the time was not good. And, as you know, in orthodontics, you don't have too many times to reestablish yourself. I had a very young family. Canada was an option, but had to go to Nova Scotia, requalify as a dentist. And I just wanted to live in a warmer climate near the beach, to tell you the truth. And my wife came home one day and said they needed physiotherapists in Australia. And she's a physical therapist. I said, apply. Long story short, we arrived here 3 months later with one child and one on the way, and we didn't know a single person.
It's amazing.
And, you get on with life, and it's just been, the greatest country in the world for me to be a part of. And I feel I've been really blessed to live here and to be able to practice orthodontics in this environment. Bear in mind, when I arrived in Sydney, which was a city of about 4 million people at the time, all the orthodontists were big practitioners except for two. And I did not know the big technique. So, I had to get a job, had to learn the big technique pretty quickly, which was interesting. And eventually started my own practice because, I just didn't feel that there were opportunities out there for me to join someone, which would have been easier. But, I hit out on my own and, it's been fantastic. It's
What year
been a
was
great
that?
ride.
What year did you start
It
your
was
own?
in 87, in
Okay.
1987. So being an orthodontist in Sydney for 39 years, still have the same dental assistant that I had on day one,
Wow.
still working with me 39 years later. And we got a wonderful practice that, we all feel so blessed to be part of, same as you do. So it's been
Yeah.
good.
There's a lot to unpack with what you just said. There's so many things here. First of all, it shouldn't go unacknowledged that your situation, you had a baby, you had one on the way, you moved to a country that's geographically isolated from everybody else you know in the world, and you don't know a soul, and
Yep.
yet you dug your heels in and you did what you had to do, right? And
Yep.
you were practicing a style of ortho with which you were completely unfamiliar, right? And
Uh,
it's a testimony to what people are capable of doing if we want to do it. Because there's a ton of people out there who would say, I can't do this. I
yep.
didn't know it was all big. I'm going back to Toronto, or I'm going back to someplace else. I'm leaving. And if you had done that, it would have robbed you of the ability of the life you now have. And so
Absolutely.
I mean, this is a great lesson because I have doctors. You can imagine how many messages I get on a day-to-day basis from orthodontists all over the world. And all too often I hear people complaining about situations in their life for which I am sympathetic, but I look at it and go, this is such an easy problem to solve. Hey, Glenn, my office manager did this yesterday and I don't know what to do about it. Like this is like, we're going to solve this in about 3 seconds. I think right now people should listen to what you went through and recognize that if you can do what you did in a foreign country with a technique you're unfamiliar with a baby and another on the way, what can't we overcome if we put our minds to it, right?
Absolutely. We're only limited by those things we don't want to see. One of my passions at this stage of my career is mentorship. I'm a firm believer in mentorship, and it's almost like a passion of mine. And when I see a lot of the young orthodontists come through and they're just at the start of their career and they look at me and look to advice, I say, I know that you'll be successful at whatever you do. And they look at me sometimes as if I'm a bit crazy. And I said, no, come and talk to me in 3 years' time and let's have this discussion again. But whatever you do, whether you want to go set up your own practice, start from scratch, buy a practice, or go work for an OSO, you are going to be successful. It just takes a little bit of courage and a little bit of support, and you'll get there.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And it's funny. There's that old saying that the older I got, the smarter my dad got.
Yeah,
Right? Like I
absolutely.
just used that with a young kid the other day. It was not young. She was probably 15 years old. And, I've known her for a while in the practice. And, her mom is suddenly knows so much more than she did when she was like 9. Right.
Yeah,
Um, but the wisdom you gain through experience in life, right? You've been practicing 39 years in Sydney. I got out of dental school 32 years ago between us, right? 70 plus years of experience. I tell people that every white hair in my beard is a mistake I made, right?
yeah,
Along the way. And there's so much for those of you listening out there who heard what he said, like, he speaks to young docs and he says, you're going to be successful. I say it all the time, no matter who you are as an orthodontist, no matter what you choose to do, you are almost guaranteed to live a life better than 99.9% of people on this planet. Whether you associate, whether you own, whether you work for an OSO, whether you work for a really boutique practice, aligners, braces, beg, Damon, it doesn't matter. You're going to live a life better than legitimately 99.9% of the people of the 7+ billion people on planet Earth. So don't sweat the small stuff, right? Would you agree with that one?
absolutely, 100%, Glenn. And it goes back to my original premise of that, how privileged we are to do what we're doing, and for the people we work with, both patients and staff.
If a young doctor came to you now, well, actually, there's a lot of young doctors who are probably listening to this right now, and they say, I really would love a mentor, right? And there are groups out there that people can join, like the Orthopreneurs RD group that I run, and there's many others. There's Schulman. There's many groups out there where you can, wherever you are in the world, you can join and have a mentor group, and generally give and take. But if someone feels alone and wants to find a mentor, it can be a little daunting to just go up to an older orthodontist and say, hey, would you be willing to mentor me? What do you suggest to a young doc who would love to have a David Bachmayer in their life?
I,
And
I would say, Glenn, you're actually doing that older doc a real a service, because people love imparting their experiences, and helping people, and I see it as a privilege to be able to do that. And I wish I'd had more mentors in certain aspects of my life, but have been, very lucky to have, the people we've had in our professions, whether it be at high school, at dental school, at grad school. We can all pick out 4 or 5 people that we really see as guiding lights in our careers, not just our careers, but in our lives. Because as you said, our lives wouldn't be what they are if we weren't doing what we're doing, and weren't given that opportunity to enter dental school and grad school. Those were real opportunities, and not everyone has those opportunities. So going back to your question, if you approach a more senior, or I hate to use it, older doc, you're actually doing that person a real favor, because people love imparting their knowledge and experiences. It's a win-win.
Yeah, I agree. I'll go one step further and add just a couple of things, just and I'd love your feedback. One would be if you feel like the local doc in your community is unapproachable because maybe there's a perception of competition, or find an orthodontist 30 miles from you, 20 miles, 10 miles from you. Find somebody who could never look at you as a competitor. And number two, you don't have to have an orthodontist as your mentor, right? The key to mentorship, in my opinion, is life experience, right? And the wisdom of having made the mistakes that you don't want them to make if you can avoid it. And I've had numbers of mentors in my life who had nothing to do with ortho whatsoever. And thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll bring it down to a very, very simple equation. When you talk about advice and mentorship, obviously our parents, have been great guiding lights in all of our lives. But I came to a new country. I had to buy a house. No one ever said to me, "Have you thought about the way that house is facing? Is it on the high side? Is it on the low side?" If you'd had a parent or mentor looking over your shoulder, it makes some of those decisions a lot easier. So it doesn't just, stop with orthodontics. It goes into every aspect of our lives, whether it's investing, whether it's bringing up children, whether it's with dealing with conflict. There's so many bits of wisdom that can be given to us that just make our lives easier without having to make more mistakes. We all make enough mistakes, as you said, and we learn from that. But life's a lot easier without making too many of them.
Yeah. And you know what? It's good to make a number of mistakes, right?
Yeah,
And the gentleman who I did a 3-year nathological, if that doesn't get people to turn this off immediately, I did a 3-year nathological residency at the University of Washington while I was practicing. And Ward was actually instrumental in reaching out to Jerry Schultz, may he rest in peace, who actually ran that course. Every 5 to 10 years, he'd run it for 3 years. And I was once walking in a clinic with him, and Jerry, did you ever know Jerry Schultz? Did you ever meet him? Or
yes, yes.
yeah, he was a real character, a very patient, loving man. But he worked at a lab bench at USC next to P.K. Thomas. Yes, folks, P.K. Thomas of the instrument, right? And so he said, we were walking in the clinic one day. We were just talking about something to do with the joint. I don't remember what it was. And I just looked at him and go, "How did you figure that out?" He goes, "Well, experience." I said, "Well, how did you get that experience?" He said, "I made a ton of mistakes." And so
Yeah,
it's a
true.
good thing out there to make these mistakes. There's a great TED talk that I talk a lot about by Eduardo Briseño. He's from a think tank in Palo Alto, I think it is. And he talks about the practice zone versus the performance zone. And he says the reason why the overwhelming majority of people in this world are not as successful as they can be is because they try to practice in the performance zone. And, if you're making mistakes in the practice zone, that's where you want to make them. The goal of the practice zone is to maximize mistakes so that when
Yeah.
you go to the performance zone, you don't. And I'd love your feedback on the idea that nowadays, because of social media, how often have you seen, because I know you're active in social media as well, how often have you seen somebody say something like, "I've never used appliance X, Y, or Z. How do you use it?" Right? Like, they're trying to learn how to do a particular procedure, or like motion appliances by Luis Carriere. Very common back in the day when I was speaking for the company. "Hey, Glenn, what's the protocol for a motion?" I'm like, you should go learn this yourself. You shouldn't be asking me for, tell me the whole Bible while I stand on one foot kind of situation. Or am I just overreacting here? And, that's what social media really is for.
The only way I'm active in social media is that I lurk. I don't participate in an active way, because my generation just we have a bit of a block against, putting ourselves out to the world in such an open forum. But we read a lot, and we look and we watch and we chuckle and we learn. You know, Look, the problem is that when we go to these conferences, we see something done well, and we think we bring it back to the practice. The staff all groan, we have a crack at it, and in 2 seconds we put it back in the cupboard because it hasn't worked for us for one or other reason. And that's why our experiences shape us, and that's why we adopt certain techniques, whether it's carrier or light force or Damon or whatever it is. These are not what make you a great orthodontist. These are things that just, they're products. They what make your job a little easier to and the results to achieve. So the problem is that we either give up on ideas too quickly, and I'm very guilty of that, or else we persevere with it and adopt them and get through it and get comfortable with it, because we all know whether we're using a Damon bracket or or a Unitech bracket or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. They're all good products, So when we look at social media, we generally, people are not posting their mistakes. They're only showing their good stuff, which, in a way can bring some of us down too, because we think we're not capable of doing such things, those that are humble. But it's definitely been a learning experience, and I thank you for what you've achieved in with the Orthopreneurs, because it's a good forum. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It means a lot coming from you. And for those who don't know, you're talking to a great guy who's also a great clinician. One thing I can promise you is Ward Smalley suffers no fools. If you don't do good clinical ortho, Ward is not spending time with you on the golf course. I can promise you that. So you have the Ward Smalley stamp of approval, which is good enough in my book, David.
Thank you.
So, we don't have a ton of time left, but I want to talk about two things real quick. One, efficiencies. You're really all about efficiencies in treatment in the office.
Yeah.
Give me a quick rundown of some of the things that you think you look at, that maybe make you more efficient.
Okay. I'll summarize it as quick as I can. I think we're all, as orthodontists, driven in a similar way. People who run practices, we want to increase our production, we want to reduce our overhead, and we want to enjoy what we're doing and have happy patients and happy staff. When it comes back to efficiency, Mary Beth Kirkpatrick, whom I'm sure you know from Gage,
I do.
She was in my practice. So we got to go back 20, 25 years ago. And she said, give me the last 20 patients you treated to completion. Pull them out right now. And we went back to the computer and she said, now tell me, let's count how many appointments they each had. And then we went through that exercise. And then she said, okay, I can tell you're running quite an efficient practice here, because, your treatment plans aren't going overly long. You're getting, you see people on time, you're finishing on time, which, by the way, is a big practice builder as well, because I haven't met a 16-year-old girl that's asking you for perfection. She wants an excellent result, but she wants to get out of there as quickly as possible. So I sort of set myself those sort of standards, never keep people waiting, get out of the office exactly on time every day. You can see your 80 or 100 patients, whatever it is, but get out of there on time, give your staff a decent lunch break, and that's going to add to efficiency. The other thing that I do is I outsource as much as I possibly can in my practice, whether it comes to fee collections, imaging, laboratory work. All of that is out of my practice. I'm surrounded by imaging laboratories, radiologists everywhere. I don't need a machine in my practice. I can send someone out of my office, they're back 5 minutes later. The images are there. Fee collections, we don't hassle with that anymore. And as I said, laboratory work goes out. That adds to efficiency. And I think a lot of it is just the type of person you are. You're either the sort of person that's late for everything, or you're the sort of person that's early or on time. and that's the sort of person I've been. So that's been a great thing because it's been a big practice builder and also has led to a lot of staff retention over the years. Most of the staff have been here many, many years and don't seem to want to leave. I hope that's answered your question,
Yeah,
Glenn.
it did in many ways. And the last thing I want to ask you about is you recently transitioned your practice, right, with an OSO, correct?
Yeah.
Nobody really at this point of the game should be, asking why, right? Um, I think for those who see OSOs as a good option, there are many positives. For those who see private practice as the better of the two options, there's some really good reasons for that as well. What were some of the factors that went into why you chose to go that path?
If I had had my way and I knew that I was going to live to 120, I would continue going the way I am. Okay. I've got a big practice, a big one-man practice. To tell you the truth, I've always been happiest practicing on my own with a large staff. It's not tenable. These things, I woke up at age 66 and I loving what I was doing, and I said, this wonderful asset that I've got could become a big liability. And I thought,
Well said.
if you're going to transition out, I mean, how are you going to do it? Because we all know we're not getting out of here alive. So I thought, yeah, we could go the normal routes of trying to find a young doc to come in, or partners, associates, and all of that sort of stuff. And I thought, that's all too difficult and doesn't give me any sort of surety or confidence, because these things have a weird way of falling apart over a few years. Not always, but often do. And that's why the AOSO was a good way of me continuing to be able to practice the way that I like and in the manner that I wanted to, without having to worry that what if,
Yeah.
and also knowing that for three groups of people, whether it be my patients, my staff, and my family, that there was now someone behind me that would look after me, look after the patients, look after the practice in an unforeseeable event. And it gave me that wonderful option of just to be continuing the way I am. And that's why it made sense to me at that moment in time.
It certainly does. One of the things I'll say as we start wrap this up, there's this saying that a friend of mine had, really good orthodontist. I love this guy a ton. Uh, it was an older doc that he had worked with who just wouldn't sell. And again, if you've heard me write, you're not the guy I write about. There's a lot of guys and gals out there in your generation of ortho who, again, you're entitled to make as much money as you want, but they tend to not want to be mentors. They tend to hold younger doctors over a barrel. They tend to ask for unreasonable amounts of money after someone's worked in their practice for 3-4 years. And there's a lot of bad will out there that I've personally seen because, like a marriage counselor sees all the bad marriages. When you're on this side of Orthopreneurs and you're getting hundreds, if not thousands, of messages a year, you see the bad side of ortho. And there's always two sides to it, but you hear it all too often, all too often. And he wouldn't sell this practice to this younger doctor. And his words he said to me are exactly what because you said your practice is an asset, but it could be a liability. And he said to me something that was so perfect. He said, this older doc is riding his dinosaur into extinction, which was so
Yeah.
perfectly put, that he was so eager to not sell that every year his desire to continue building a practice was waning. His desire to go out and market was waning. Newer doctors are moving into the area. His market share was getting smaller. And if he wasn't careful, he'd find himself 5 or 7 or 10 years down the road with a practice that no OSO would want to buy, that most younger doctors are going to shun and not want to hang around and be a mentor to anybody at that point. And so kudos to you for making the decision when you did, when you chose to make the decision because you could,
Mhm.
not because you had to.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely, Glenn. You don't want to be making decisions in a stressed environment, and a good friend of mine said, you want to be making some of your decisions just a little bit early, a little bit too early in some people's opinions, because that's when you have the power to make the decision you want, whether it's selling your practice, transitioning your practice, even going into a retirement village. Do it while you still can decide how and where you want to go. And as you said so rightly, there are hundreds of stories out there of dissatisfied young doctors who are promised the world.
Yeah.
And then the old doc psychologically can't get himself over the hump
Yep.
of letting this baby go. So it comes from both sides. So, yep, it wasn't such an early decision. I made it when I was 66 years old. But bear in mind that I'm contracted for 4 years. So that's another 4 years, takes me to 70. And hey, I don't want to give up orthodontics when I'm 70 years old. I still want to be around mentoring, working in some way, shape, or form, possibly doing some outreach work, teaching, and that's the way I see myself in the next 4 or 5 years too.
Well, we are all fortunate to have you in our profession. You're really one of the good guys, somebody I really respect a ton. Here, the podcast has been in Australia twice now in the last couple of months. First with Vas Sravasanan. Uh, like you said, I gave it a good go.
There you go.
Vas and you, and our RD group is going to do our annual Lux meeting where we do one meeting a year to somewhere special, either the Maldives, Bahamas, wherever. In 2026, we're coming to the Gold Coast. And so I can't wait to give you a hug and say hi and spend some time with you.
Look, I want to give a good shout out to Sydney too. The Gold Coast is good, but Sydney's better. A really great city, and if any of your listeners ever come down this way, I'd love to catch up, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you and giving you a good hug too.
Yeah. And by the way, I think you just corrected me properly. I don't think we're going to the Gold Coast because we're starting at the Sydney Opera House. And I think in January, the Gold Coast is the worst place to be in Australia because of cyclones, right?
Well, not
Typhoon.
really. It's a bad place to be because all the school kids go there after finishing their schooling, and there's if you're a bit younger, Glenn, it would be a good place to go. But for you, go another time.
We sound like old men right now, David. We sound old. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate you, my friend. And just can't wait to see you whenever that is.
It's been great. Thank you.